But I also don't think we can go back to this naive American idea of global solutions. The idea that we can just go back to the 90s, of global conflict resolution or global governance, for instance, of the internet. I don't believe that this is not going to work, right? So that's...
Welcome to The Void, a series of experiments produced by the Institute of Network Cultures, where we examine everything between platform nihilism, digital activism, and meme research to alternative economies in the arts, speculative AI, and urgent publishing. For The Void of the Platform, we thought it was about time that we invite the man who started it all, INC founder and internet critic Geert Lovink. Geert recently published a new book called Stuck on the Platform, which we will discuss today. Hi, Geert. Thanks for being here.
Chloe.
We are currently experiencing what one could call a platform blues. In your new book, you write, while some believe that our persistent resentment, complaints, and anger are merely part of the human condition, totally unrelated to the shape and size of the information ecology, others, like you, are convinced that we have to take the mental poverty, the online billions, seriously. We can no longer ignore the depression, anger, and despair, pretending they will all be gone overnight after installing another app. This also relates to your previous book, Sad by Design. Could you maybe tell us a little bit more about that book and what the platform blues means?
When Sad by Design came out in 19, this period could still be considered a period in which the monopolies or platform capitalism, as it is also called, established itself and really put a lot of weight on investments in infrastructure. Let's say it was still a period in which things were being rolled out and people got used to this new normal, and it was a little bit maybe of a new insight that there was so much manipulation happening either on the level of behavioral modifications to get people hooked on these social media or platforms in general, and it was a period in which people were kind of having some mixed feelings. So some felt, okay, yes, I don't know, is there another place I can go to? Are there any alternatives? Or people were still excited about possibilities and online dating and everything else, right? So it was a bit of a mixed feeling at the time, and the main essay in the book, which is Sad by Design, showed that people were being trapped, or as others called it, that there was a culture of regression in which there was no way out, and that people felt trapped. And that this sadness, as I call it, but others would call it depression, or the male variant of it is the anger and anxiety. Yeah, it's a whole scala. Of course, it's a spectrum of affects and emotions and responses. This started to have an accumulative effect, resulting in a culture of regression and stagnation with nowhere else to go.
Mm-hmm. So what has changed since your last book while writing your new book? Of course, the COVID pandemic happened and it certainly changed a lot of things. You write, we wanted to use the pandemic to reset and move on. We failed. So in Stuck on the Platform, you described the state of Zoom fatigue, for example. Could you explain what that means?
in general, I think 3-4 years ago, all these things were new insights. I want to start with the good news that there is a growing awareness amongst the billions of users, the public in general, the experts, of course, and the media makers and even regulators about, let's say, the negative impact on the mental state that the very architecture of these platforms are having, right? So there is, let's say, a cumulative insights. So that's a good news. However, this can also make us even more desperate, because if we start with let's say subliminal influencing, a subconscious feeling of being trapped, being influenced, being limited by fake news or addictive aspects of it.
Doom scrolling.
Yeah, doom scrolling, for instance, which became very, very big in the COVID period. Then we were looking for alternatives, but they're not readily available, right?
So Zoom is still the only option.
Zoom is the only option, Instagram, you name it, right? So people start to become aware of what these platforms are doing with them, yet
there's still dependence.
Yeah, there's no real catalog of strategies, which has always surprised me, because in the beginning, in particular, let's say 10 years ago, I was quite naive, still believing that, when a new generation comes up, let's say now Generation Z or a couple of years ago, millennials, that they would just revolt and say, all this crap of the boomers. Why should we buy into it? Why don't we just
create something new? Yeah.
Create something new, revolt, right? And this was a really naive hope on my side, that that, let's say, after GeoCities or all the others, a new platform would come, right? So if you're coming from, let's say, the 80s and 90s, you got used to a constant change, and this change around maybe 2012 or 2015 got to a halt. And in fact, we're now already in a period of almost a decade in which not much has changed. And yes, that still surprises me, to be honest.
Yeah, I guess TikTok is the biggest new player, especially for the Gen Z.
But TikTok can also be said that it was just a clever but late Chinese adaptation of Snapchat, and that's now with the growing weight of of the Chinese, let's say, venture capital, and they have not just adapted, but with TikTok found a way to advance a certain concept, not just copy it. And in that sense, we can just praise the Chinese for having moved on from very cheap, stealing and copy paste culture to and hopefully a next level in which the Chinese will even outsmart the Californians in this business.
According to you, network nostalgia might propose a solution for all of this negativity and the blues. But let's go back first. Could you tell us a bit more about the heyday of the network? What did the network look like? And why was it popular back in the day?
In my last book, Sad by Design, I wrote a small but quite conceptual chapter called Media Network Platform, in which I described the, let's say, changes, the genealogy of these three key concepts that have shaped my generation. Yeah. Coming from alternative media and tactical media in the 90s, new media, of course, as a almost a very empty container concept in which a lot of hopes and ideas were projected upon, to a more specific idea of how people would relate to each other in the social aspect, which was the concept of the network. And the network was, of course, initially was seen as an alternative to the centralized top-down broadcasting method of, let's say, television, radio, newspapers, and so on, right? So the classic 20th century media landscape, which was something there we could appropriate, or we could own. We could do pirate radio, or we could do local cable television, or produce our own magazines or zines. But nonetheless, it was still even in the most critical analysis seen as a top-down medium. And the network really had the promise that it would deliver more feedback, more, according to the whole cybernetic principles, interaction, participation, and self-determination in the end, which was, of course, an idea that we also had previously, right? That you can take the media matters and representation issues in your own hands, and that you were no longer depending on these large corporations or state-owned media. Okay. So in the 90s, these things came together in the early internet, and we started to build networks, communities around a variety of topics. And these networks, of course, they were, as networks often are, they're quite informal. They were focused on collaboration and cooperation, but they couldn't really find serious alternative economic models to sustain themselves.
How big were these networks usually?
Yeah, usually, as we know in the literature, right, it says that a network is ideal when it has 150 members, because then it reaches the optimum. Above 500, you start to lose overview. You have no idea anymore who is really around, or who is taking initiatives, and and then the so-called power law starts to kick in, right, when you have 2,000 or 5,000. And this is exactly what happened in the late 90s and the early 2000s, when networks became so big that
they were unmanageable.
They became absolutely unmanageable, and there's this moment then which is called Web 2.0, when other types of software were necessary to cater for the enormous economies of scale. And that's when we see the rise and the first birth of social media.
Yeah. Yeah, and in your book, you say this is the age of network extinction. Platforms did the rest. Networks have been neatly excised from our tech vocabulary. So what happened after the peak of the network? Where is the network now, would you say?
First of all, networks can no longer really sustain themselves as autonomous entities. This is a problem, right? So long time ago, people gave up to have their own, servers, to have an independent infrastructure that would cater for real independent networks. So there's the problem of hosting and maintenance on a technical level, but also on a social level. Because things started to grow and diversified, this was no longer an option. The networks, where they are these days, as we know, they've been subsumed inside the platforms. And according to Mark Zuckerberg himself, he is taking care of the networks, right? He alternatively still uses the two terms together. He talks about networks and about communities, right? So he's using the two terms, and I think he's correct in that sense. This is a real kind of 90s mixture, because these are, after all, techno-social construct in which there's an element of technical networks, of software that we learned so well to visualize, and then there is the social network of people interacting with each other. And these days, as we know in the social media, that's primarily quite narrowly defined. Most of it is family and friends related, so quite close to your personal life. And then maybe there's a social life. Not everybody has, but okay, there's the soccer club, and you can become member of certain clubs and communities, and that's about it. But the platform takes care of it all and sets also, and that's the most important aspect here, sets the parameters for the internal communication. Yeah. The good thing about the platform is that we can all find each other very easily, and that it's an app, that it has an enormous sophisticated form of usability and smooth interaction. Yeah. On the other hand, we cannot define how we communicate there.
Yeah, so the networks are being shaped by the platforms, and we don't have a say in how that happens.
Very often the platform explicitly limits the sovereignty of the network. Yeah. And of course, they will define the terms under which you have to talk, exchange, and then there's of course also the whole issue of internal censorship or so an enormous sophisticated form of surveillance, and of which we now 10 years later know so much more than a decade ago, which is probably a good thing, but unfortunately all this knowledge has not resulted in alternatives.
You write in your book that the problem here is not the avalanche in internet critical literature itself, but it's the limited impact and the lack of a political roadmap on how to change the internet architecture. So going back to the network mentality could be a solution for the platform blues, right? Because in Stuck on the Platform, you ask yourself, what do networks look like today and how might we rethink them? How would that work?
some people, of course, especially in Europe, believe, like me in part as well, that the solution is really also to come together again.
Like physically, yeah.
Yeah, like we do in this studio, which, it sounds a bit strange, but in comparison to the Zoom condition under which we had to work, Zoom and Teams, to be more precise, the fact that we are sitting here at a table in a studio is already
great.
it's an enormous progress. Yes, we and the Institute of Network Cultures are looking into ways how to critique and develop alternatives for hybrid events, for new ways in which online and offline can come together. And a lot of people will say we have to start with a return to the physical gathering. And that's why, in the past, we also put so much effort into organizing conferences, events here in Amsterdam to bring people together in physical space. Right? So funny enough, and not so many people know that, but the internet culture and the internet infrastructure has always been built on coming together regularly in physical environments. And so there is no pure virtuality here. And especially if we're talking about further developing the medium or coming together to resolve, let's say, conflicts or to have discussions and debates. For this, the physical environment, also for the engineers, also for everybody, is absolutely crucial.
Do you think that the network metaphor still works when returning to meeting physically, or should we drop the term and maybe use something new?
I'm ready to drop the term, definitely.
That's quite a statement from
yeah,
from you.
I understand. We are the Institute of Network Cultures after all, and I think it's really time that we challenge ourselves to start to rethink the social. And because we need to find out how people want to come together, how they want to interact, how they want to, also have discussions, debates, disputes, and resolve them. Because
especially that last bit.
Yeah, the last part. Yeah, it's very. But there can only be a resolution if you have understood and agreed on what the problems are, and at the moment, of course, in the current platform blues, we see that this has completely become a management problem of filtering, censorship, employing tens and tens of thousands of invisible moderators somewhere, in the global south that clean up the mess for us.
Which is very traumatizing work as well.
Absolutely. And so this is not the way we will come to conflict resolution. I'm very sorry. The exclusion of the other, the exclusion of the troll, is not the way out. This is, it's a classic psychoanalytical insight, but if you repress it on this side, it will
come out somewhere else.
It's come out somewhere else. So that type of management, is in a way only contributing further to the misère, as I call it in the book.
And if we rethink the network and speculate a little bit, do you already have an idea of what a new metaphor could be? Or is that too big of a question for now?
Well, first of all, I think, and we are now entering a new phase again after my book, of course, because we're very involved now with the support of people in Ukraine in the war. I think in the next decade or years at least, we will be defined by the very harsh and new frontiers and borders between the geopolitical blocks. So I'm not a fan of it, but I also don't think we can go back to this naive American idea of global solutions. You know, there are no global solutions anymore for this. The idea that we can just go back to the 90s, you know, of global conflict resolution with all its mechanisms, or global governance, for instance, of the internet. I don't believe that this is not going to work, right? So that's a romantic option. That is, and I think also the critique of globalization, the critique of these global governance mechanisms was already very loud 20 years ago. It was very clear that this was in fact a Western hegemonic, imperial idea, right? So now we live in a complete new environment in which we have to deal with the geopolitical realities of China with its sphere of influence, of a crumbling US, of a very uncertain Europe that is there, and other places that in the world that are kind of stuck between, emerging out of poverty and dropping back into poverty again, right? So and this strange mix that we see in many parts of the world then results into an enormous rise of authoritarian solution, in some cases right-wing nationalists. And anyway, so this is the world we're living in, and the internet that we are using, that we are shaping, is part of that world. And so, our analysis should start there.
So, Geert, as a final question, could you maybe reflect on writing this book? How was your experience? What did you like the most about it? And why should people read it?
Yeah, it's number 7 in my ongoing series of investigations of the state of the art of critical internet cultures. This book is probably my most free one. It was an honor to work with Valise, and they gave me a lot of freedom, much more than I had before. So it means that for the first time, the book has a substantial part in the middle with aphorisms, which is a genre I love. But yeah, I haven't really included them, or have not really been able to so far. To maybe collect them as a book in itself, also because publishers they really don't like aphorisms, because who in the end who's interested in that fading genre. Although I believe it's very close to the 160 or so characters of Twitter, and so in that sense, to be able to summarize your ideas in a very concise, short way. I've always loved the slogans and the work that I've been doing together with designer Mieke Gerritsen. is probably known. So I love slogans and sloganism. And the fact that this is included in the book is means a lot to me, and hopefully the readers will enjoy it. I've also included a chapter on non-fungible tokens and the whole discussion of Money Lab, which are also in my previous book. So there's an update of that work too in the book. So by and large, stuck on the platform, will give the reader a very good overview, I hope, of where we are.
Great. Well, thank you, Geert, for this lovely conversation. And thanks everyone who is listening and watching. And we'll see you at the next episode of The Void.